So good evening, everybody. Here we are again at SPSM Chat 2.0 reboot. That's an interesting name because I never noticed that the original SPSM had a 1.0 down at the bottom of it all the time. Who knew? My name is Anne Marie Matulis, and I'm your host this evening, and delighted to be here with a very special guest for me. And Sarah, say hello to everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
See how easy that was? So we have a double topic conversation tonight, and you're going to see some questions coming out on the Twitter feed, everybody. If you could take a look at those, we really would appreciate seeing your feedback and your comments about it. These are two difficult topics, and we hear it a lot. And I started on the blog saying that I spend a lot of time in schools. It's not that's not the only thing I do, but I do spend a lot of time and have spent a lot of time over the last 12 years in schools. And the question I get all the time is there a connection between bullying and suicide? Now, the CDC put out a report in 2014. It's a nice little PDF download. You can get it. There'll be a link coming out that you can use to access it, and it's about the relationship between bullying and suicide and what we know and what it means to schools. And I'll cut through it all. There's some good information, nice info. It's what I like about it is it's easily read. You're not getting a lot of clinical talk. You're not getting a lot of you're not being buried with stats, all of that kind of stuff. But what you get is an honest evaluation of where we in the field who work within suicide prevention we're at right now. And Sarah will address it too because she may have some different data. But as of today, our academic research says that while bullying is a component, it is not the single cause of a suicide. We don't have the scientific data to say that because, like any suicide, it is never just one thing. There's always a compilation of things that are happening, even if we can't see it ourselves at the time. So, and that's very frustrating to parents. The other thing that I find too, and Sarah, maybe you can address this too, is that most people are very confused about what bullying is. Um, I'm not saying it's appropriate behavior, but shoving someone in the lunch line is not bullying. I mean, that's just really bad behavior. It's rude. And then for everybody out there watching right now, and Sarah's going to talk about a component that we don't talk a lot about and probably needs a whole lot more of a spotlight on it, and that's the whole issue around rejection, and how difficult that can be. I need to say right up front, I was never bullied, and I really racked my brain because I thought, well, you just being, and I wasn't. And I think a piece of it too is I spent formative years from the age of 8 to 18 in a national competing drum and bugle corps. And as a result, from that young age up till 18, we were family. We were a unit. There wasn't that kind of there was some light teasing, but there was never anything that we would describe today as the mean-spirited type of bullying that went on. We took care of each other um, because we had to. You could lose a championship by a tenth of a point, so we couldn't have that. That just didn't happen. It was also a very long time ago, a very, very, very long time ago, where maybe we were just we were just brought up differently. I don't know. I don't know what brought this all about. And Sarah, if you have any insight, I'd love to hear it. So I cannot speak from that perspective. I can speak from the perspective of having had a teen center for 9 years, still have it, 900 kids, and I can tell you they were incessantly bullied and harassed. And I mean heavy duty, mean spirited, feeling life threatened over the course of the years because they were different. They were goth, they were gay, they were skinny little kids or they were overweight. It didn't matter. They were the kids that were emotionally on the fringe, and they had some serious nightmares going on. And that was for me that was horrific and sad to see. So everybody, my name is Anne Marie Matulis. I host this event on Sunday nights because I was foolish enough to raise my hand. one night, and someone said, we should really get SPSM going again. I said, yeah, that's a great idea. And I got two emails, one right after the other. And they said, tag, you're it. So here we are. I serve in Massachusetts as the regional director for a suicide prevention coalition. We have 10 in the Commonwealth. We work under the Department of Public Health, and Sarah happens to be the co-chair of one of our other 10 coalitions. We are miles and miles apart, though, we geographically. I also I'm the founder of a Voice of the Table, which is a safe haven, we hope, and a new resource for impacted family and friends, those impacted by suicidal experience. And I have the privilege and honor of chairing the American Association of Suicidology's Impacted Family and Friends Committee. Now, I'm going to step back and disappear. Tracy is not here with us tonight, everybody. She's sleeping. She's doing it overnight. So she'll be getting up in a couple of hours to go. I'm sure she'd say hello. And by the way, if you are on social media, tomorrow is her birthday. So wish her a happy birthday. And she'll say, how did you do that? And I said, well, I just told the world that it was your birthday, just because. So, Sarah, talk to me. Tell us, pick up from here. I know there's a tremendous amount of information out there. Some of it's inappropriate, some of it's incorrect. Um, so, I'm going to turn this over to you and sort of keep Hap and I on the Twitter feed for us. And the show is yours. I'll be back in about, well, when you stop talking, or in about 15 to 20 minutes. How's that?
All right, Amory, sounds good. All right.
Go ahead.
So I think I want to just start off by differentiating, like you said, Amory, about what it means to be bullied or bullying. So oftentimes, a lot of people push back and say, well, kids will be kids and that sort of thing. And that's really coming from the fact that sometimes we call things bullying that's not necessarily, in my view, what we mean when we talk about bullying. So when I think about bullying, I think about a very specific and targeted behavior where an individual is targeting another student or sometimes even coworker, because unfortunately we know that adults can be bullies too. And so it's a really intentional behavior. It's very targeted. And so that's not necessarily the same thing as a schoolyard tiff where two kids sort of just have a moment where they don't get along and maybe they push or shove each other. But I want to sort of back up a little bit, because when I think about bullying, there's often something that happens before that. Unfortunately or fortunately, I actually have experience with both of these things, which is that piece of social rejection, and then also having been bullied in high school. So I want to just sort of reference what I mean when I talk about that social rejection. So from a very personal perspective, as a first grader, I struggled immensely. I was probably, in hindsight, a very anxious child. And I had a lot going on. I had, my parents had divorced. I lost my dad in my life. My mother remarried, which meant moving to a new town, which also meant having 3 new step siblings. And for a 6-year-old, that's an awful lot of stuff happening. And so, what I experienced was that there was just a lot of sort of chaos around me. And then I went to school, and I think back to being that little kid with that tray, right? And you're walking into the cafeteria and you go through and it's so heavy and you don't want to drop it because everybody's going to look at you. And you walk into the cafeteria and you just hope somebody will give you that look. That means you can sit with them. And what it feels like to be 6 and have nobody give you that look that says it's okay to sit here. And the amount of stress that caused. And interestingly enough, I now, at my age and having learned all about these things, I recognize that I probably was a relatively impulsive child. I probably wasn't picking up on some of the social cues. So there were things about me that other kids were probably responding to. But what ends up happening when we see this social rejection is that, hang on one second, I just had that pop up on my screen again.
Okay.
It's gone. When we talk about that social rejection, is that you have a child and they're in an incredibly important time developmentally, right? Where ideally they're going to be connecting with other kids, they're going to be playing, they're going to be learning social cues, they're going to be doing all of those things. But what happens to a child if they're not getting that opportunity? Right. And
Yeah.
so that sets them, now you're talking first grade, second grade, maybe third grade,
Mhm.
right? Where this child is not getting that opportunity to learn those social cues, to learn how to interact with other kids,
Yep.
right? And so if you have a child who's already anxious, maybe they're going through a lot of chaos at home, maybe they're experiencing domestic violence,
Yep.
um, maybe they're experiencing, sexual trauma or homelessness or food insecurities, and then they go to school and they're being rejected by their peers. What's the impact going to be?
Right.
Right. And in fact, I have a little girl in my life who is actually the center of a series of books that I'm working on. Um, and the book is going to be called Goodnight Grace. And it's actually in the process of being illustrated right now.
Cool.
And Grace's mom is addicted to heroin.
Mm.
And what ended up happening is this child was sort of bounced back and forth within the system. She had a lot of developmental trauma. And so, she's a little bit behind
Mhm.
in learning social cues. And she's so desperate to have friends. All she wants to do is have friends. But what's happening is because she's so desperate to have friends, sometimes she comes on a little strong. Well,
Okay.
the outcome of that is she's being rejected, right? So the other
Yep.
the other kids are rejecting her, they're pushing back on her, which of course, you think about being this little kid, and now the message you're getting is my mom doesn't love me, which of course we know that's
Yep.
not true, Anne-Marie, right? Mom
Yep.
has mom has an illness.
Yep.
But when you're only 9 years old,
You don't know that.
you don't know that. So the message is
No.
my mom doesn't love me.
Yep.
And then I go to school and the kids don't want to play with me. And the message becomes there's something wrong with me because even the kids at school don't like me. Right. Well, fast forward, we shouldn't be surprised to learn that now we have a child who's being diagnosed with learning disabilities or behavioral problems. Right now, in my view, which I understand may not be in line with a lot of other people's, I think that this child makes perfect sense in the context of what she's experiencing.
Absolutely.
Right. And so for me, what that ended up looking like is in, I believe, second grade, I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. Right. Which,
Right.
so there's the pathology. So now we're
Yep.
saying to a small child, right, there's something wrong with you. That's literally what we're saying, is that yes, there is something wrong with you. So how does a
Hmm.
child take that in?
Yeah.
Right? How does a child absorb that message, especially when they're getting it from everywhere? They're getting it from the parent who left them,
Yep.
they're getting it from their classmates, and now they're even getting it from doctors,
Yep.
and they're getting it from the school. Right? So to me, when we look at the trajectory for a lot of these kids that this is happening to, what we're not realizing is what sort of all of our roles may be in that being the trajectory. So I think that social rejection piece is extremely important, especially because oftentimes it's happening and nobody's picking up on it.
Yeah. If I can, I have to, I've heard the term, but you talking about this tonight, Sarah, is the first time I've seen it come to life. Why are we not talking? Why I'm about to ask you a question. I know. Why are we not talking? Why am I, as someone who's in schools all the time? Why have I not had this in front of me? And shame on me, is what I'm saying, because this is an absolute piece of the mosaic that. So I just did 9 schools, and I've got like 12 more to go, and then another 10 after that next semester. And backpedaling now. Now the good news is that I promised the superintendent of schools, the school department that I'm working with, that they will get a comprehensive link list. This is going up in the top, not in the middle. I can't thank you enough, and I cannot be I hope I'm not the only one hearing this for the first time. I mean, not just hearing it, but understanding how this is so connected. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, 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 no. Thank you. I'm glad you're saying that because I think it's so important because it really becomes about how a child conceptualizes themselves.
Oh yeah.
And when I have a little girl look at me and say, no one asked me to go to birthday parties,
Oh,
right? And so, but one of my rules, personally, but I also think a lot of people in the field agree with me, is that people make sense in the context of their lives, right?
yep,
And so when we see somebody acting up, when we see a child behaving in ways that maybe aren't in line with what we normally see, my experience is there's almost always going to be an explanation.
yep.
But oftentimes we don't dig deep enough
Mm,
to really figure out, as the trauma informed lens says, what's happening to this child or what's happening to this person. We tend to ask the question of what's wrong with them.
right,
Um,
right.
you know, and so for me, the messages I got everywhere was there was something terribly wrong with me. And how is an 8-year-old going to contest that?
They can't.
They can't.
They
So they
can't.
don't.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for me, I think a large part of it, up until probably late middle school, was really about that sense of social rejection,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to sort of figure out, where do I belong? Do I belong anywhere?
Mm.
And so, what starts to happen is you find the other kids who feel that they don't belong anywhere,
Yep.
right? That birds of a feather. Now, I also think it's really important to understand that one of the things that we need to work on in the mental health field and the suicide prevention field is the way in which we judge families. Because so often families are afraid of telling us the things that are happening or have happened to a child.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're afraid of is our judgment,
Right.
right? But what ends up happening is, because we don't find an obvious answer to what's going on for a child, we end up pathologizing that child. And then there comes that message of something is
Yeah.
wrong with you,
Something's
right?
wrong.
Something's wrong with you. And the solution for that something wrong with you is oftentimes medication or therapy, or, right, instead of, and to me, one of the most important things we can do is start to really fight back or push back on the judgment that we pass, on families in particular, because my experience is most families are doing the best that they can.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I I I ended up tangled in a, I'll use the word discussion. It was a little more than that, about using the word prevention when talking to a family who has someone in the emergency room or in crisis. Um, I saw someone do that, and the parent turned around, the tears streaming down her face, and she said, "Don't you think I have done everything I can to keep him alive?"
Yeah.
And the visualization, the personification of that was like a knife going through my heart. And I swore that I'm going to take that word prevention out of, and you should see me catch myself when I'm talking with the school personnel. And I said, think about when you say that. I said, I know that everybody in this room has a heart in this, that they don't want anything else to happen to these kids. So it's not that you wouldn't prevent it. We just need to take education from a different angle.
Right.
And I understand that. And the more I see it, the more I see how, once we label, it is so hard to get those labels off. And that's a whole group of people that we think about with youth, that you and I might talk about in youth, that I don't think the bigger picture is looking at. It's not just the kids who are being bullied. There's another factor in here that we're not paying enough attention to. Okay, I'm
No, I agree with you. And I think, so then sort of moving us to what happens with these children as they're moving through their lifespan or their educational span. Oftentimes birds of a feather flock together. So they
Mhm.
find other kids who are also struggling. And that's where the bullying piece, for me, in my mind, often really sort of comes into play. So often, what we don't recognize is that, happy, healthy children are generally not bullying other children.
Yeah.
And so really asking ourselves, what is the bully telling us in their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
What are they expressing to us through this? So when I was in high school, I had a group of girls who really, really, really hated me.
Nice.
I know. And because I had grown up with this something's wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
I sort of just accepted to some extent that these girls really, really hate me. And I don't recall really verbalizing the experience much, to be honest with you. But at one point, I was in a little bit of hot water. Anne Marie, I know you can't believe I was ever in hot water. I was. Actually, this is a side note. It turns out I am incredibly good at bad advice and bad ideas. So, but as I've grown up, I've learned to think twice, but I didn't always think twice about it.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's all right.
So this is rewinding back to when I didn't think twice. And I was home. I like to call it a mini vacation. Most people called it a suspension, whatever. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah. All
let's not
right.
pull things apart. And the phone rang. And so I picked it up. And it was, interestingly enough, my mother also, this is back when the phones were on cords.
Oh, wait a minute. There are people out there who don't know that, Sarah.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So I think I was upstairs on the phone that was tied to the wall. Yep.
I
And my
see it
mother,
coming. I see it coming.
yes. And what I didn't realize is that my mother, who was downstairs, had also picked up the phone. And what she heard was kids calling from the cafeteria at the payphone, threatening me. Did I lose you? Uh-oh. Anne-Marie, are you gone? I don't know what just happened.
Oh, we can see you, son.
You can see me? Can you hear me?
Lost her.
We lost Anne-Marie.
Keep talking.
Uh-oh.
Keep talking.
I'm going to keep talking. Oh, so apparently you're all waiting for the rest of the story. I'm so sorry. So my mother picks up the phone and proceeds to listen to girls calling me from the cafeteria at my high school, threatening me. And it was extremely easy to think that I was the only one experiencing this. And I can tell you some of the things that I experienced after that were being really, uh-oh. It says she left. You can still hear me? I don't know what's going on with Anne Marie. Hopefully she'll pop back in. It's a one-man show. Wasn't expecting that. So anyway, the end result was not wanting to go to school, not caring about grades, actually wanting to find any way I could to get out of it. And so really thinking about how for a kid who's going through that, it leads to this sense of incredible isolation, despair, can cause all sorts of other symptoms in them. Here's the interesting point to this story. Years later, I went back and I actually spoke to some of the other kids who I'd gone to school with. And I asked them if they had been aware of the fact that I was going through this bullying. And I learned two really interesting things. One thing that I learned is that not only were kids aware of it, but the reason they didn't step in wasn't because they thought it was okay, but it was because they were afraid that the bully would then turn their attention onto them. The other thing I found out, which I had no idea of, was that the girls who were bullying me were actually bullying several other people at the same time. I was not the only kid who was being targeted. And so it was this really interesting experience as an adult to learn more about it and to be able to step outside of the experience of a teenager feeling so isolated and fearful and alone, and really desperate. And understanding that it really increased my willingness to be around other kids who maybe I wouldn't have felt were a great choice otherwise, but because I was so desperate to feel engaged and involved and accepted somewhere, I went against my better judgment. And so, really thinking about how being the victim can then make someone susceptible to making other social choices that can become very problematic for them. But I also want to think about what was going on for the bully. Because so often we think of bullies as, just being big and mean and all of that. But one of the things that I learned afterwards, again, much later in life, was how hard things were for the bullies. That for many of those kids, they came from homes where there was a lot of difficulty. Maybe they were being exposed to domestic violence. Maybe they were